Welcome to The Disruption Is Now. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore how AI is impacting our jobs, careers, lives, and the human experience. Each episode, host Greg Matusky will converse with visionaries and innovators at the forefront of AI, diving into its challenges, opportunities, and impact. So buckle up as we venture into the heart of disruption, and together, let's unfold the future.
So welcome to another episode of The Disruption Is Now. I'm Greg Matusky. I'm the CEO of Gregory FCA, and I'm a big advocate of generative AI and how it's going to transform the workplace. And our podcast is everything about AI from start to finish and how it's disrupting the human communication process and how we understand each other's as human. And I got to tell you, I was really excited by today's guest because I met him probably 3 or 4 months ago, where he sent me an email and he had seen some of my postings on LinkedIn. He was very interested in learning from a very tactical level how I was specifically using generative AI. So we became friends, and he was gracious enough to include me in his upcoming book. My guest is Dr. Mario Garcia. Now, he is a professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, and his real expertise has been in helping media organizations become more worthy digital storytellers. And I was fascinated by that because he brought in our conversation a lot of information I had never even thought about as far as how you consume information digitally. And Dr. Garcia has a new book out. It's AI, The Next Revolution in Content Creation. And he was gracious enough to include some of my quotes in that book. And it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. It's a great read about what we're seeing in journalism. Dr. Garcia, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Well, it's my honor and my pleasure to be here, Greg. Nice to chat with you in person, quote unquote.
And did I get that right? Is that where you're coming from in the world of communications?
Yes, I think that I have been in this business now 54 years. So I have seen a lot of transformation, and I try to keep up with those transformations. And right now, AI seems to be a major revolution, and one that anybody who creates content, whether you do a church newsletter or whether you're working on your high school newspaper, you need to pay attention to what AI can do for you and the dangers and the fears that surround the topic as well.
Let's drop back for 1 second because I really want to establish your authority here. You've worked with some of the biggest media properties in the world. Tell us a little bit about that experience to help set the table here.
Right. I think I'm known primarily as a visual journalist / designer. And so I have changed 764 newspapers in 120 countries in terms of their layout, their presentation. I introduced the color for the Wall Street Journal, worked with the Washington Post on its 2008 remake. So I have been an agent of change, so to speak, in the visual part of journalism. Beginning in the late 1970s, I was a professor at Syracuse University at the time, and my book, Contemporary Newspaper Design, came out at that time. And it was a time when newspapers, which were all black and white and had never paid any attention to looks, were beginning to hire art directors. They would not call them art directors. They would call them managing editors for graphics, which was more of a manly type. Art directors is too much for magazines. And so I was there to witness that revolution. And my book, Contemporary Newspaper Design, had like 3 different editions in 2 languages. It was in Spanish and it was in English. And there were parts of it in German translations. Then came color in American newspapers. By the time that book came out, which was more like 1991, newspapers around the world were really going to color, and they were looking towards the U.S. to see what is it that color will do for a newspaper. So after that came the big revolution with the internet, which we all know what happened then. Many editors ignore that, 1996. And they decided, well, the internet is for young kids who don't read print and all of that, and they ignore it to their peril, basically. Um, then came the fifth revolution, and that was the subject of my book titled "The Story," which is the first of all of these revolutions to really affect how journalists do their work. Because the way you write for mobile to be consumed in a very small platform is quite different from the way you write copy to be consumed in larger platforms. And the irony of all of this, Greg, is the fact that it's a horizontal versus vertical situation. Most of the content in the world today is created for horizontal platforms, whether it's a PDF for information about a bank, instructions on how to put a bed together from IKEA. Everything is done in horizontal formats. The world is consuming it on a narrow vertical format. And so I was involved in conversations with Adobe about this because they are, of course, the creators of InDesign. And our conversation was based on the fact that there is now, um, they say that there is about a trillion PDFs floating around the world from universities, hospitals, scientific institutions, and all of these are done in square format. So you see people reading them on phone and trying to make the type bigger. Why is this? I mean, in any other business, if the consumption is done in one way, you would not be producing the product the other way. We are still in the horizontal versus vertical revolution. And here we are with another revolution at our doors, AI.
So let's jump to that. We're at a threshold. Tell me a little bit about what you discovered in your book, and where do we stand on the publishing side of AI, do you think?
Well, I began to research AI about 2 years ago. And it was one of these moments where you realize that this is serious stuff. You need to take care of this. And I remember in my career, again, 54 years, moments like that. I realized that newspapers were going to color before they went to color. A couple of newspapers were beginning to experiment with color, including in Florida, the St. Petersburg Times, which was one of the pioneers. Others will add a logo in color. And so, where would you turn? There was no Google in those days. Where would you turn if you were a journalist, a visual journalist, and not a color expert? The other industry where they had gone from black and white to color was the movies. So I turned to that. There were veterans around who were part of the transition. And, I always say, as a Cuban who was born in Cuba and grew up in Miami, I know about hurricanes. And they always used to tell you the dog in the house smells the hurricane 2 or 3 days before it comes. The dogs are sort of acting weird. I don't know whether that is a sort of an old wives' tale or not, but we always say dogs sense that the hurricane was coming. And maybe I have that kind of nose. And I smelled AI as a big revolution. Whether you like it or not, you cannot stop it. So I began to research it primarily to be able to teach my students at Columbia, where I'm an adjunct professor. Um, my course is titled Mobile Platform Design and Storytelling. And I said I must have a unit on artificial intelligence. So then by the time the publishers approach me, I already have a year and a half of research done. And what I learned, the takeaways of what I learned is that many of the very smart people that I talk to um, convince me that this is a big revolution that will affect all of us. Right now, it's in its infancy. It will affect all of us. In fact, the CEO of Microsoft said this is like the invention of printing. And most of my sources told me that this was beyond the impact of the internet, which I believe. So that was the first part of it. But I'm 76 years old. So I am told that I'm the oldest person on the planet talking about artificial intelligence, which I'm proud of that. Um, and the second takeaway is realizing that AI has a lot of information, a lot of data that it has learned. But all of that came from humans, whether it is Shakespeare dramas or whether it is Hemingway novels or the best scripts ever written or the best songs or poems, humans did this. So I began my book. I had a couple of conditions for the publisher. And I guess at the age of 76, you can probably have conditions. I said, I am not an expert on this. Nobody is. I don't want to write a scientific treatise on AI because I am not a scientist to do this. So if you let me write this as a conversation with the readers, like an essay, a journalistic essay, documented with facts and with reporting and interviews, like the interviews I had with you, I will do the book. And so, here is a book where I mentioned Gabriel Garcia Marquez and magical realism and all of that, which is, it really places in the context of what is this all about? Again, at 76, a lot of this is like science fiction that you are in the middle of. So the second takeaway was humans play a key role at the beginning of the process, and then you get stuff from the robots. And then a human has to correct what the robot has given you because robots tend to hallucinate or to go into different directions. I always tell the story to my clients these days that I had a very interesting conversation with ChatGPT one day about mobile storytelling. How could a robot help a reporter who's trying to do a story for mobile? Organize it, create the outline. And suddenly the robot quoted from my book, the story, and I was so excited that I said, "Oh, Mario Garcia, I am Mario Garcia," and immediately told me, "No, you are not." And so, how do you know that I am not? But I continued. But in the course of one of my chats about mobile storytelling, for maybe 20 minutes, we've had give and take, and he was smart and he was very well put together, well articulated. And suddenly I said, "Tell me more." When I did that, he went into a song from Greece, tell me more, like, does he have a car? And so if you are dealing with AI, you have to realize that there are going to be pitfalls like this. You basically ignore that and say, "No, no, no, I don't mean the song. I mean, tell me more about mobile storytelling and its role in journalism." And then he will go back and do it. But at every step, you're realizing,
And I think I'm just going to
yeah,
inject here for a second. I think there's a couple things you said that are really important, right? I think the human in the loop, very important. And I think going back when you were talking a bit about how, a bit about the weirdness of AI. And I think people look at it as software and it should always be consistent. If you have software as a calculator, 10 times 10 is 100, 10 times 10 is 100. We're so used to that with computers. But this is not the world of software. It comes up with different conditions. It'll from one day to the next. The same prompt will yield a different result. It will find information that might be misplaced, but might open your mind to a
exactly.
whole new direction. Right? I often go to I was listening to a podcast, Lex Friedman's podcast, I think with Mark Andreessen, right? And he told the story that he went into a large international law firm and he said, look, and he was presumed that they would want it never to hallucinate. These are the smartest
Mhm.
lawyers in the world. And he said, I can create an LLM which will really reduce hallucinations. And to do that, we also have to throttle down its creativity because when it hallucinates, it doesn't have that fact. So it makes it up. So we can prevent that. And but you're going to have a trade-off in that it's not going to be as creative. And they said, no, right? We want the creative. We have junior associates who can validate whether that's a real case or not, case law.
Right.
But what we don't have is the ability to see new thoughts, new arguments, things we would never consider that the defense might bring up that we can counter or we could make on behalf of our
Right.
client. So as an example, I was recently writing a prompt and I was doing a prompt and it critiqued it, right? I was writing something and they said, you need more data. And I said, give me an example. And the machine wrote the example paragraph, but the facts like 30%, 1985 are wrong. But the machine was telling me was here's where you need data to substantiate your article. And what it did was hallucinate the actual number. Now, in my world, we always checked the accuracy of anything we did. There's nothing new there. And I think sometimes we hold AI to a higher standard of Google, which is full of mistakes and errors, than we do ourselves. And as I was a former magazine article writer, and it was up to me to absolutely make sure the unemployment figure was right in that number. So I think that's an interesting point you bring up. What do you think it'll do in the newsroom? Is this the end of journalism as we know it, or is this a whole new path of reconstructing the process?
I think it will do. I want to backtrack also to a lot of what you're talking about here, which was very interesting and deals with a lot of interesting topics. But what will it do for journalism? I think that human bylines will become extremely valuable and important because we are going to see, and we're seeing already, where you have parts of the story were contributed by ChatGPT. Um, and I think that I tell my clients, you need to have a protocol of how you use AI because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. The readers are smart, and many of them are using AI to write speeches for weddings, for funerals, for graduations, for whatever. So if you quote from AI and you do not tell your audience, you may have 120 years, a legacy of great journalism, but you will throw it out in a minute because people will begin to doubt that anything you publish came from AI. So it's better to have a protocol, a
So
guideline.
do you think there'll be a hierarchy of value and trust accordingly, or how will that pan out? Do you
I
think?
think that I'm an optimist, and I think that um, journalists, the value of a human journalist will be uh, increase greatly. When you see by Mary Jones, Mary Jones is a real person, but it could be my Mary Jones, comma, assisted by ChatGPT. That's the first thing. The second is that journalists are going to try harder because a lot of what artificial intelligence can do is, and this is a difference that we need to understand. If you are a genius, I've heard this from some of the sources in my book. If you're a real genius with a great memory and so on, you can probably bring to mind words, word combinations, and so on from about 3,000 websites. If you're well read and so on. The AI assistant, intern, associate editor that you have sitting by your side can deal with 175 billion parameters of everything that is out there in the internet, everything that humanity has contributed. How can you compare with that? And let me tell you, now going back to your statements, when I was
Drill
writing,
in. I want you to really pull this out
yeah,
for us.
okay, when I was writing my book, I was very aware that my companion was artificial intelligence. I wrote the book, but when I would finish chapters, I would put him in there and say, help me with this chapter. And this is the advice that I have for everyone, including my grandchildren, using it for help with high school papers. The more you put into the prompt about your ideas, which I also learned the prompts that you contributed for my book. I tell people, these people in marketing and public relations are doing the word stuff better than the journalists, which originally trained to be word people. But anyway, we'll come back to that. I would put the chapter that I wrote in there. And Greg, what I would get back sometimes was exactly what you mentioned. I might hallucinate here or there, but it will add elements to my chapter that I did not think
Exactly.
about. But why is that? I'm a human, 76 years old. I'm not a genius. So I am bringing my perspective, the reporting I've done, the interviewing I have done. My assistant, quote unquote, has access to 175 billion parameters of everything that has been written. So in every one of those, chapters that AI gave me back, I was able to, and I, by the way, I publish them in the book, as you saw in gray, what ChatGPT had, so people can see my stuff and their stuff. But there was always, inevitably, one or two elements that I didn't think about because my reach did not go that far, which AI did. In that sense, how can it not help a journalist? How can it not help the student newspaper editor or you doing planning a campaign? Of course, but you are there at the beginning to prompt. It gives you whatever it's going to give you, and you take whatever, just as you would if you had an assistant that you send out to the library in the days when we went to a library. When the person came back, that person may have been 15 days in the library researching 20 books. You're going to take three lines from one of the books. We always did this. So I think that that's how you have to look at this.
So, your opinion is this going to drive journalists to try harder, right? And I agree with that. I mean, I was reading. I'm sure you've recognized the name Ethan Molick. He's a
Yes.
professor at the Wharton School, and he talks about the jagged edge of what uh, generative AI does well, what it doesn't do well, and some of the things it doesn't do well. Right? It doesn't find case studies. It doesn't find human voices. Right? It doesn't. It can't do an interview yet. It can't find the world leading authority on oncology and interview them. And this is so much a part of journalism, but it's been dropped out, right? If you read, for instance, the Huffington Post, it's all just desktop stuff. There's no real research. It's opinion, it's feelings, it's nonfiction. But when I was young and I was a freelance writer, that was the kind of pieces you'd never get paid for.
Right.
The kind of pieces you get paid for is you interviewed 20 people and you got to the top CEOs of four different companies and you found things that you just couldn't find other places. Right. And that's what's missing a lot from journalism today because newsrooms have been so slashed. They have such limited resources that sometimes they drop back to opinion instead of this old school, let's get voices in
there. But
there.
At the same time, this is where AI can come in and help. And I use the example AI cannot feel yet any emotions. There is no emotion. So if you are a reporter in a medium sized magazine or newspaper and you're assigned to do a story on a debatable, controversial topic like abortion, okay, you as a human journalist have an idea about abortion, whether it came from your mother, your priest, your rabbi, whatever, you have an idea on the subject. Okay. Number two, you may have known somebody who had an abortion. You may have been told by your mother you were almost aborted, but I changed my mind. All of those things are within you. And so you're about to write your story on abortion. The robot cannot do any of that because he doesn't have any emotions at all. But I'm the writer, and my story is going to deal primarily with teenage abortions. I would, while I'm going to my interviews to talk to priests and teachers and mothers and so on, I will tell the chat GPT, get me numbers on teenage abortions in the US versus Europe versus Latin America by race, by economic class. That AI can do very well. Obviously, you will verify the numbers. But while you are doing the things that a journalist, a human can do that AI cannot do, you're not going to have to spend countless hours digging all of the facts, which you are very right. A lot of the time they're missing from stories today because staffs are smaller and the time is shorter and everybody has to produce a story. And one very important point, when I was a reporter with the Miami News and the Miami Herald of the 1960s, we had copy editors who verified everything. Right now, many of these reporters are writing on the field, press send, and it goes. So AI will force the copy editing because no regular serious organization will take whatever AI gave them and publish it like this. It's not going to happen. So I think that the optimist in me sees reporters working harder because they will have more time to deal with what humans can do best: the interview, the applying of collective memory, experience, what you bring to a story, all of that. AI will be able to give you facts and and give you angles for stories that you never even dreamed about, because it has machine learning. It has learned to put words together in ways that you can't. Once those two things are there, the third factor that a person told me while I was researching my book was, I was saying, who are the people who lose their jobs in newsrooms or anywhere? And it's very ironic that it will not be journalists, because journalists are word people. Coders will lose their job. There's no coding involved here. But the word people will not lose their job. However, he said something very interesting. He said, in many newsrooms, there is such high level of mediocrity that an editor looks at what a reporter does and says, oh, it's good enough. Not excellent, not Pulitzer Prize winning stuff, but good enough. Many of these people who can see savings are going to say, the machine is not perfect, but it's good enough. So I think that there will be, I was just doing an AI workshop for Latin America in Colombia last week, and I said, I think that mediocre reporters are going to lose their jobs. So they are going to have to wake up and say, I have to be better because I cannot just be good enough. So all those changes are going to happen.
You know, anytime you talk about AI, you could end the conversation with this term. Could be, right? Because as you said in your preamble, no one knows what the future holds, right? Will it affect the mediocre the most, or the high paid white collar professional the most? I think that's up to debate. There was a recent study of consultants. I don't know if you saw that. Boston Consulting Group did a study where they gave these consultants, highly paid professionals, a case study and said, do all the work that's in there, right? Half of them used generative AI, half of them didn't. The ones that were seen beforehand as being in the lowest percentile performance gained the most from it. And they were then within 4% of the most talented individuals.
How about that?
Those that were the most talented only saw a modest bump in their performance levels, right? And in that sense, it was kind of a skill leveler in that it brought low performers into the high performer category. These low performers are paid less, so it's very, very attractive on a productivity level to put more responsibility in their hands and get rid of the higher level. I know in my firm, it's interesting that those who have accepted it most quickly, AI, are those who are the best writers, because they see what it does and they're just awe-inspiring. Those people that aren't good word people really don't know what's good or bad. It's kind of like the scene from Amadeus when Amadeus runs up to the king. Yeah. He just played this concerto and says, "Sire, what did you think?" And the king is a nitwit, doesn't know anything, has to rely on the court composer, who was Amadeus's arch rival. And he says to Amadeus, then the king, after he listens to his court composer, is very jealous of Amadeus, he says, "Too many notes," right? And because he didn't know, right? Like, there's no helping that individual, perhaps, but helping those individuals who really want to become better, who really want to become more craftsmen in their trades. I know that's what excited me, because I had spent so much time, Mario, trying to teach people in my firm how to write, who would come to me, and it was frustrating teaching someone to write. And I really believe my skill came from having done it for 10,000 hours, having worked with words intimately for early in my career as I was a writer. And I would go into my basement and just pound out words and rewrite it. And I created a neural pathway that allowed me to use words and direct the message at the same time. It connected those. I think today, in most brainwave studies, language really isn't connected to thought. So we don't have to worry about AP style anymore, because the machine will do that. We don't have to worry about verb tense. The machine will do that. But where do we want the message to go, right? Where do we want the final product to go?
Exactly.
I think that's what holds the greatest hope for us, and why I've been so excited about it. Someone emailed me yesterday. They're giving a presentation, and they're saying, where do you rate generative AI's impact on public relations. One to Greg Matusky, because in my industry, I am perhaps more optimistic than the vast majority, because I see all the risks as being manageable, with one exception, and that is, will these machines become aware and sentient? That's the real risk. It's not whether it plagiarizes. There are ways to tell if it plagiarizes. It's not whether, I think the whole copyright or plagiarism issue is kind of a red herring. I just can't believe the courts are going to say that you can copyright the relation of one word to the other, because these LLMs, they don't copy the internet. They create algorithms of how words flow. If you can own that, then there's no textbook in the world that I could read and not share with somebody else in the future of what I learned, because I will have learned how words relate to one another, right?
And
So
and your
I think a
people
lot of
do this very well. I I have to tell you, and not simply because I'm on your podcast, that when I was reviewing the material you sent me, you had 400 word prompts that really led to wonderful feedback. And you are in a PR firm, you are in a situation where you're writing corporate copy and all of that. Journalists are not doing this. A journalist is going to work with a specific story and said, help me with a story about that. If you would write 200 words, and that's what I tell my students on the first day of class, I tell them, I know that you use AI. I use AI. So we're going to be transparent with each other. Okay. There are 14 of you in the class. They're graduate students at Columbia. And I tell them, we have a weekly assignment here. If the assignment for next week is, give me what you think are the three best designed websites in news. There are 14 of you. If all you do is, because you are lazy, you go into a chat GPT and say, what are the best three design? I will get 14 versions of the same. I know you're using AI. So when you do that prompt, and I use prompts from your examples, I said, already put your ideas in there. I think that NBC, Bloomberg, and Reuters have the best websites. And I think that they are the best because of this, that. Help me articulate the point. Then you've contributed. The same with the kids who are in high school. I have grandchildren in high school and college. Don't just simply, they help me with a paper about Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. No, you have read the book, you feed into the prompt what your ideas are, and then see what the chat GPT is going to give you. But we are lazy. And I was very surprised that in 2 years researching this book, I'm honest to tell you that your prompts were very complete and already gave the chat GPT a version of how you relate to the story. And then you got good
and that's
results.
such and because it's natural language, it's so easy. I tell my people here, just riff with it. Like, you don't have to worry about organizing it or being redundant. You just talk to it like it's your assistant.
Right.
We would talk over a conference table, and then give it as many facts as and then see what it'll do. I had an instance last week, Mario, where I wrote about a paragraph, and I thought it was a good prompt, but I thought I should keep going. Like, I should really beef this up. And then I said, no, let me see what it comes back with. And it came back with some pretty wild stuff and thoughtful stuff, and information it pulled from the projected world, right? Not just what comes next in the word flow, but this was projecting what this industry was about in its
Yep.
current
Yep.
state. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could just bottle this, Anyway,
At the same time, we need to worry about biases. And I work worldwide, and I have to give you an anecdote of the last few weeks. I have clients in Saudi Arabia. Most of the work is done in London because they own the major Arab language newspapers and magazines. And when I did my AI workshop, I was very surprised to hear that it's all about words, obviously. And this Arab journalist told me, if you prompt in English about the Arab situation, the Israel situation, the long standing feud between Arabs and Jews. In English, you will get pretty much the U.S. State Department version of events, like a PR release. If you prompt in Arabic, you get a whole different perspective of this. And obviously, you and I don't think about this. We're prompting in English. I have seen the same when I prompt in Spanish about certain things. If you prompt in Spanish about Cuban related items, that's where I was born, it will give you a more fiery, debatable issue of, is there a great health system in Cuba? If you do it in English, the words, there are so many people who never even visited Cuba and think, oh, it's wonderful. The health system is fantastic. So that's what it draws from. So the Arabs, going back to them, it makes sense. If the chat GPT is drawing, putting together in words, the words from the Arab language are going to be perhaps less balanced or more balanced, but they are going to present a perspective that reflects the Arab world thinking about this issue. When you do it in English, quote unquote, they told me it's the State Department talking, because a lot of the debate and a lot of the conversation in English is going to be from people who perhaps favor the Jewish, the Israeli side of the operation. So all of these are things that a person who produces content needs to be aware of. I mean, um,
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to test that because ChatGPT does do a great job of translating. So I'm going to write a prompt and I'm going to put it in Arabic, Chinese, and English,
yeah,
and then translate it back and see what the
or
difference. But
Russian,
there is one thing to think
You
about.
will get the Russian Ukraine situation, the perspective in English, which is the major language of AI. Obviously, is going to draw words that present a totally different panorama than if you were doing it in Russian.
But think, as long as we're talking about bias, just think about this for a moment, which I never had the opportunity to do before. And that is put the machine, right, in another hierarchy. So I can ask it to show me what it would be like. Review this piece of content from the viewpoint of a young black man who lives in the inner city, or
Exactly.
review this content from the Russian perspective, or imagine you're a Russian writing this paper, and that could help overcome some of this bias because we can change the point of observation of the machine of the world to open our own mind. So,
Right. Yep. I think that you would
well,
have to say, act as if you are a Russian citizen, comma, describe the outcome you see for the Russian Ukrainian war. You know, then you can say, act as if you're a Ukrainian citizen. And if you're a journalist, I think that this is how we will use AI. It may be a little bit of work. You may have to make that chatbot act like a Russian, like a Ukrainian, but at the end of the day, you would build a story with a lot of interesting context that you wouldn't have otherwise. You see, so you
absolutely,
have to do
we're
that.
running.
I
We're
am
running.
now. I'm now aware. In Colombia, they told me the same. If you are dealing with the coffee industry, for example, and you do it in English, it's going to Colombia is going to be mentioned, but not as important as we would like to see it. If you do the prompting in Spanish about major coffee producers in the world, Colombia, because there's a lot written about Colombia in Spanish and not in English. So you have to be aware that the chat GPT is going to have to be helped along if you want to get a more complete picture of whatever it is you're researching. But just doing it in English and getting one version is not going to be it. We're finding out.
Well, it's been a fascinating time. I really appreciate you joining us today. I'd love to have you back in the future. I know you're a busy guy with your business and your academics and your writing, but you've really helped me gain perspective on many of the things you said today. I look forward to when the book's widely available. I guess you sent me a digital copy. I don't have a
Yes.
print copy yet, but congratulations. Again, the book is AI, The Next Revolution in Content Creation. and it's Dr. Mario Garcia at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's been my pleasure. See you soon. Bye.
Be in good health.
This podcast is a production of Gregory FCA. If you enjoyed our discussion today and want to continue exploring the transformative power of AI, please check out more episodes and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.